Yay! I managed it. I'm
Darn
so
it.
shocked.
Welcome, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining me and the Flutarians. Ruth is, I would say, an expert in focal dystonia at this point in your life, and we connected, I suppose, through Facebook. You noticed what I was doing in Flutarians, and you recently started an online method and group that you were kind of exploring what other groups are doing, and so we had a little chat. Welcome. All right. Yeah. So, Ruth, would you like to just get started with maybe telling us first, for those who may not know, what is focal dystonia and how did you get involved in all of this?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Well, focal dystonia is a medical term. I don't think it really reflects what it is, but it's the best term to use because it's the one that we can all understand. It's basically where the body stops responding in the way it should do. It's focal, meaning that it's supposedly in one area of the body. So, for instance, we might see actually, I'm going to hold my hand, so at least I
Okay.
have it set up, even if I haven't made a note out of it yet today. So for instance, so an example would be that the person can't just lift up and down this finger properly, that it suddenly hyper extends and then they can't bring it back down again, and that movement is out of their control, right? Or for instance, or that the finger pulls off the key, and that's happening without being able to control it. It can also happen with the tongue, with the embouchure, where we can't control the corners of the mouth any longer, or where the tongue seems to be sluggish and doesn't respond effectively, so we can't vocalize properly. But it can affect any part of the body. I mean, it can affect the foot, it can affect the neck, it can affect the vocal cords, it can affect the diaphragm. Almost any part of the body can be affected by this. But it's particularly prevalent in musicians because we develop so much fine motor skills. And so there is a connection between the grade of fine motor skills that are developed, and also it affects musicians because we notice it. So, for instance, if you are an accountant and you kind of lose the control a little bit of this, you're not even going to notice it, right, in day to day. But because we have to be so precise with the way we direct the air, if that goes off, we notice it straight away. So for us, it's a problem. Whereas I'm using the example of lovely accountants.
Sure.
For an accountant, it wouldn't be a problem. They probably wouldn't even notice that it was happening.
It's
Right? They would just notice they can't whistle properly. Something like that.
yeah. But for a musician, it could be a career-ending thing potentially,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. It
Or
was for me.
okay. So tell us about that.
So I first started playing music when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I started with the flute by about 5. I think I had this, I don't know whether any of you have heard James Galway talk about these little Irish flutes that are about this big. They're kind of,
Like
a lot of kids start on them. So that I found one in our loft. and so I was self-taught, just would play along to all the music I'd hear on the radio and things. And then by the time I was 10, I was put into proper music lessons and had my weekly music lessons. And by the time I was I can't remember when the anxiety started. It started before. There got to a point where I started to feel a lot of anxiety. Just even looking at the instrument would start to give me panic attacks. I certainly had stage panic. And then by the time I was 18, I was preparing my... in the UK, we have the ABRSM, the Royal School of Music exams. So I was starting to prepare my diploma for that and also preparing for auditions and things for university. And suddenly couldn't control the corners and couldn't make a sound at the instrument. I mean, it was a zero sound. Game over. Teachers just told me I wasn't practicing enough. I should try. I mean, we're talking about a long time ago here, right? So we're talking maybe nearly 40 years ago. Um, and teacher saying, well, I just should try hard. There was no diagnostic on these things in those days. And it wasn't because of that. I mean, I was practicing hours and hours every day. I had been practicing for hours every day and just couldn't play any longer. Didn't really know what it was. I kind of put it down to the anxiety, the performance, but I kind of had a sense of where it was coming from in terms of my early attachment history and things like that. And then, so I went on and did a different degree and ended up working for a major bank. And part of the things that I'd got involved in with the banking was performance. I mean, like managerial performance. And started what was back then, it wasn't even called coaching at that point, but started to, do executive coaching with these people. And then one of my colleagues worked with the British Olympic team, and said, "Oh, that weird stuff that you do with those guys, do you think that would work for our people?" And was then started to do performance coaching, because I was fascinated by performance blocks, obviously because of what had happened to me. So, started to do some performance coaching with them, and then wind right forwards a number of years ago now. I started working with a Premier League basketball team. And one of the basketball players suddenly couldn't get the ball in the hoop on a jump shot. So, started working with, he was Croatian originally, started working with him around what was going on. And what happened was that his toes would go into spasm every time he went to jump. Work with him from this perspective of this being about developmental trauma and then other traumas and injuries, and worked through that. So I work with with techniques that are about neuroplasticity, not about talking there. It's about literally rewiring the brain. So we rewired his brain around that trauma, so he wasn't having the trauma impact, and the foot sorted itself out.
Wow.
And then, so as a result of that, then other basketball players were coming to me with similar problems. It's a small world, word gets around. And then here's the coincidence. So I wasn't calling it focal dystonia at that point.
You didn't even know it was called.
I didn't make the connection until one of the tuba player, actually, the tuba teacher rather, at the Conservatoire Superior here in Granada, where I live, is a big basketball fan. So he'd been reading the newspaper about what I'd done with these different basketball players. And he said, "Will you come and give a masterclass at the Conservatoire?" So I was like, "Sure." So I did, and then did a little bit of work around performance blocks with one of the euphonium players. And at the end, the trombone teacher said to me, what's going on with those basketball players? I've got the same thing going on with my tongue. Do you think you can help me too? So I was like, sure, come into the office, and we did our work, and that resolved that for him too. And at the end of that process, he said to me, "Do you know that this is called focal dystonia? The doctors say that it's uncurable." He'd had it for 20 or 30 years, and he was like, or maybe not that long, 15, we've had it for over a decade, a long time. And he was like, "I've been to every expert in the world and nothing. And here we are, several months in, and I can play again." And just said, "Please start, get the word out there, set your website up, get the word out there, work with people." And at that point, I still wasn't playing. I hadn't even. Sorry, can you hear? My dog started to bark. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was coming from you. Woof.
It's me. So I hadn't resumed music again. So we're talking about maybe 30 years without playing. Picked up the flute, problem was still there. But I thought, but now that I know that it's focal dystonia, I know what to do about it. So I kind of did my own therapy on myself to then get back to playing.
How long did that take from square zero to, okay, I can do it?
How long? It's a bit like how long's a piece of string, meaning that I've had people that I've worked with that in sort of 3 to 4 months are back, playing normally, and I have other people that maybe in 3 to 4 years. So it really depends. For me, it didn't take long. It was maybe a 6 month process, but I'd already done a lot of therapy around the underlying causes.
Mm. I can only imagine how stressful it would be to go from, for example, being a professor of trombone to you're teaching your lessons and you can't demonstrate for your students,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
you have to cancel your concerts or
right.
anything. I yesterday I watched your interview with Victor Wooten, who's a famous bass guitar player, and he
Mm,
was talking about how his fingers would curl, and he for a while there he was only playing with his first finger. Um, and
mm,
one of the things that I found most interesting about what he said was that when he put a name to it, when he heard focal dystonia, oh, that's what I have, it seemed to get worse.
mm, mm,
He said to him that was a signal that there was something going on in the brain, not just in the body. So that
right.
seems to have really been a big clue for you coming from more of a psychological perspective, right?
Uh, So whilst I'm a psychologist, I've actually very, like right from the beginning of my career, I've always been working in a somatic way with people because I recognize that in myself. When I was working with my own anxiety, my own panic attacks, I did that through yoga, through meditation, so I did that in a very body-based somatic way around working with trauma. And then was all the courses that I was taking were about neuroplasticity and how the connection into the neuroplasticity is through the body, not through the words, because the words are right up here in the top of the brain, but those trauma responses are happening right down here in the brain. And the part of the where that's connected to is the body. So I had been working in this very somatic way, right from way back, um, which I think was why I was able to work with the focal dystonia in a different way from other people.
There were You have a couple of reviews up on YouTube. Please, y'all, go watch them. Some of them are really powerful. And one of the ones I watched yesterday said he brought up this quote of, you can't solve a problem with the
Mm,
same mindset that it started with, or something like
mm,
that.
yeah,
And when I hear
yeah,
you tell your story, I think about, okay, well, here's all these people in the medical profession coming at it this way, and you came around the long way and you were like, oh, this is working. Let's do,
right,
and people encourage you to do it some more.
yeah.
Um, I have another question jotted down that I think you already answered, but I'll go ahead and field it. I said,
Mm.
what what was the moment or catalyst where you realized there was a path to healing?
I think for myself, let's take it beyond the focal dystonia, right? The relationship that we have with this comes out of the relationship that we have with ourselves. So, really early on in my life, kind of almost from when I left home, certainly my early 20s, I realized I was a mess, right? And I realized that it was difficult for me to relate to the world because it was difficult for me to relate to myself.
Mm,
I felt like I wasn't enough and I was rubbish and unlovable and, um, you know, and just felt like really about myself. Like everything was wrong with me.
mm,
And so I started to engage with healing around that. Some of that through traditional therapy, but a lot of it was from, as I said, from yoga, pranayama, breath work, which was really quite unknown back then. I mean, it's now very kind of in the forefront, but back then that was quite unknown. and then also through meditation. So that was when I realized that these such deep levels, like we can heal at such a deep level of being, that we can really come home to ourselves and be at peace in our relationship with ourselves. There's a word that Carl Rogers is an amazing psychologist, and he has this term, which is to have unconditional positive regard.
Mm.
So I really learned that actually I can come home to unconditional positive regard towards myself. And therefore, I begin to have that same relationship with other people, and I have the same relationship to music in general, and the same relationship to my musical instrument. I'm not being. This doesn't frighten me any longer. This doesn't feel like something I've got to battle with or something I've got to struggle with. This is like pure joy for me. This is my dearest friend that I can say something that I'm unable to say with my human voice through sound.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my ally in being able to do this. Which was the relationship I had when I was really little with this little fife. It was like my best buddy that I would walk around all day with.
I'm picturing you with some little ratatouilles following you.
So I think like that idea of the healing, I think came right from there. And then of course, some of the thing about the beauty of not having a label, we go back to what Vic Wooten talks about. As soon as you got the label, it's like, whoa. So some of the beauty that I didn't have that label when I started to work with my basketball players. So I was seeing it with these really fresh eyes, the beginner's mind, as the Buddhists would say, where I was seeing, well, this is about your relationship to yourself. That's why your body is responding in this strange way. And that relationship with yourself comes from all these, for him, very terrifying experiences that he had during the Balkan War when he was, younger than 7 years old during the Balkan War. And then, and his father had PTSD, and, so we worked through, and that kind of caused this schism in his relationship to himself. So as we worked on that, for him to come home with himself, then come home with his, into this place of deep inner peace and deep joy, and the joy again for his sport, and the joy again for the, it's no longer, oh my God, if I miss, I'm going to be benched. I'm going to be all that fear. He wasn't engaging with the sport any longer from fear. He was engaging from that pure joy that he'd had as a child when he started playing basketball. And so, of course, the body responded to that.
Mm.
Does
Putting the
that
joy
answer
back
the
into
question
it.
around the healing journey?
Well, I'm sure we could talk for many hours about this. When you're talking about it, the visualization that I'm getting is the lightning like neural network in the brain.
Yeah.
I've seen some pictures of it, and this idea of there's this one pathway that's really strong and bright, and then sometimes you can't go through it, you got to go around it.
Right.
And it's like you have to form a whole new pathway, and
Yes.
that's why sometimes it takes months or years, because the
Right.
original pathways are so ingrained from who knows how old we were.
Yes,
I
exactly.
hear a lot of similarity in what you're talking about in these other fields of study to some of what I'm doing in Flutarian. So some of you who may be watching the replay may not know that the Flutarian school is we are a supportive community of flutists who are improving our improvising. And how I came to be here, the short version of the story is that I was on a classical performance track hoping to play in an orchestra one day, and then I went to the University of North Texas. It's the biggest public music college in the country, and the competition there was so extreme. And at the same time in my life, my first year of college, my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died of cancer. And that combination of events just made it to where I had absolutely zero interest in competing. Like, I couldn't even make it into the orchestra at my own school. How could I hope to make it into an orchestra professionally? And so I
Yeah.
quit playing. I finished my music degree, but I really didn't play. at that time. But when my dad's favorite songs would come on the radio, I would pick up my flute and I would play,
Mm,
and I would
mm,
start improvising with them. And that,
mm,
coming back to the instrument, not as something for an audition or for a performance or for a contest, but as a tool for catharsis, a tool for self-healing and that type of thing. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was becoming a better flutist because I was learning how to express my own unique voice.
mm,
And then
mm,
eventually, after moving to Austin, which is kind of a live music capital, people started asking me where do I teach, because I'd started improvising with a kirtan group
mm,
here and a folk rock band. And so that's when I created the Flutarians group. And there's only a tiny percentage of classically trained flutists who know that they're ready right now to improve their improvising. And then
mm,
everybody else falls into, I feel like, one of two categories. One is, I can't do it, I won't do it. And the other is, oh, I would like to do it one day, but I don't know how. I don't know how to start.
okay.
And so when people start finding their way into my world, I feel like only half or even less of what I'm doing is technical teaching, and the other half is counseling. How do we deal with that inner critic? How do we approach the flute?
Mm,
How do we approach our instruments with joy and curiosity and playfulness, like when you were that little child just finding an instrument in the attic, where this is I have another shirt that I wear that says it's called playing for a reason. It's supposed to be fun, right?
mm,
And so
right.
I feel like, well, I just let me bring it back around to a question that you
Mm,
can roll with. Um, I feel like improvisation or improvising on the flute is a totally new path. And a couple of years ago, when I went to the National Flute Association convention, I sat in and listened to a panel about focal dystonia. And one of the
mm,
participants said that for her, playing music that was a different style than the classical pieces she was practicing when the dystonia showed up helped her to stay
mm,
relaxed. And so I know that you improvise a little bit. Do you think that improvisation or even simply playing a different style of music can help people, in the sense of you're not going right at the problem where the anxiety was showing up, but instead you're doing something new and just
mm,
using you're still accessing those skills of, okay, here's
mm,
my major scale or whatever, but it's
mm.
a new pathway.
Um, from my perspective, that story tells us a lot. So I would think rather than a new pathway, it's about a new relationship.
Mm,
So so she was talking about being able to relate to music from a more kind of true place, innocent place, relaxed place, a place where there's not all that I've got to be something or I've got to do something place, but just from this place where there's no pressure, right? Um, and and look how the dystonia doesn't show up. So this really isn't a coordination issue. This isn't a body issue. This is a relational issue, right? Which is what one of the things when I started to say about 10 years ago online, this is a relational issue, people laughed me out of the room. Now everyone's kind of going, oh yeah, focus on it's a relation, and they're sort of working in this more kind of, I call it neurosomatic, this more neurosomatic way, which is really great that there are more people, more therapists that are working from this perspective. But the real deal is when I can learn that type of peaceful relationship, the joy, when I can learn to be in relationship with myself in all moments of my day, in all situations. And then I can learn to relate to any activities that I'm involved in from that place.
mm,
So I think that's like a really good first step. But then the next step would be to learn to become so familiar, right? Build that path. become so familiar what it's like to engage with playing the flute in that way, that she could then say, well, I could play classical. I could go to an audition with that same sense of ease. And then she wouldn't have the dystonia in the classical world either.
This is actually reminding me of something that Nancy said a couple of months ago, where she said, my stage fright is almost totally gone, and I know it's from practicing improvisation. It's this ability to carry with you anywhere. Even if I make a mistake, it's still going to be okay. It's still going to be fun, enjoyable,
Right.
and worthwhile to the people listening.
And I would say even more than that, Vic. I think that the what you're doing that's so fantastic with the improvisation is you are giving people the opportunity to make mistakes, because when we're improvising, we are going to make mistakes, right? It's part of the path. And so what happens is I make a mistake and I don't die.
There's no bear chasing you.
Right, right. Because I think that's the fear that we often have, particularly as classical musicians, is that if I make a mistake, either I'm going to die or the world is going to end. And we realize when we start improvising, particularly in the type of environment that you create, which is, let's just have fun. Let's just see what comes out. Let's just be. Right? That's our ideal learning environment. So I make a mistake and I didn't get eaten by the bear. The earth didn't crack open into a massive chasm. And life just continued as if nothing happened. And as people get the opportunity to have that experience of making a mistake and it being not only safe, or even celebrated, or certainly out of the mistake, I've really learned something, I've really improved. Life is better because I made this mistake. And the more times we have that experience, then the mistakes just don't seem scary any longer.
So did you only approach improvisation after you came back to music?
So what was interesting was that I could play the saxophone without focal dystonia. So I picked up in my early 20s, I picked up an alto sax and I got involved in a jazz cooperative, but I didn't last very long. I only lasted about 6 months because I just didn't even know where to start with improvisation. And I just felt so overwhelmed. Like everybody around me was like really, really great improvisers. I didn't even know where to start. And so I left. So again, I just so value what you're doing, Vic, because you're giving people a space to walk into where they can learn. Because I don't think, you may tell me I'm wrong with this, but I don't think improvising is simply as simple as I can go in with a band playing a jazz standard and I'm going to be able to play an improvisation over that. I kind of think there are training wheels, right, that we need before that. And so that was the environment I sort of was put into. And then everyone else played great solos. And then I'd just go kind of like, and, and then feel silly all of the time. And so just left. So that was my only experience of improvisation before. Actually, really quite recently. I've only since November started to improvise with this new band that's asked me to join them.
So what changed?
My flute teacher tells me that this should be the name of my autobiography. I can't remember how I said it to him, but my postman knocked on my door and said, "Will you join my band?" So that's what changed. So I live in a small village in a rural part of Andalusia in southern Spain. And I had been playing, I kind of was involved in the music school and had played at some music school recital, classical. I was playing, what did I play? I can't remember, it was some classical music that I'd played. Devienne, I played a Devienne piece and something else. And he also, because it's like a small village, anyone can play what they want. So he was like the next on with his band, right, which was a kind of a blues band that he had at that time. There was him, piano player, and who's also my accompanier. So I play in duo with when it's had accompanied me in those pieces, and a singer. So he kind of heard me play, and I think something had been going on in his mind. That band kind of didn't get off the ground, but he set up another band. And then at the end of last year, he literally knocked on my door and said, I've got this kind of soul, rhythm and blues, R&B band that we've set up, and we'd love you to come and play a couple of songs with us in our next gig.
There's definitely a transition happening there, though, in that recent time, though. Like, how did you go from showing up at the band, being like, okay, fine, I'll show up, to, okay, now I'm playing without sheet music and it's fine?
I think just because of all that work that I'd done on myself, it is true then that I'd said to them, okay, which songs do you want me to play? What keys do you want me to play them in? And I'd be, before I went to the first rehearsal, I'd kind of put them on YouTube and was playing along, right? So I did a lot of stuff of just playing around and playing along. And they said, the guitar solo within this, would you do a flute solo in that? So the first song they asked me to play was Woman by Nana Cherry. It's a fantastic song. I mean, I'm a massive Nana Cherry fan, was a massive fan of her father. So, it was like, yeah, of course I will. He must have intuitively known and just sold it to me. Like, how can I say no to Nana Cherry? And so, so I prepared in that I just relaxed at home, just been playing along and playing around and just kind of like tootling around over that guitar solo, different things, different ideas. And so when I went to the rehearsal, it wasn't like I went from zero. And it's much easier music than jazz as well. I mean, it's in a horrible key. It's in E flat minor, but but in terms of chord structures, you're only talking about 2 or 3 chords that you're needing to work with that are repeated over and over again. So it felt like it was a low challenge, and it was a great environment. I know, I'd kind of chatted with Sergio a few times, just in the, he brings my mail and we'd sit and have we'd kind of chat away. And I just know that he's such a nice guy. So that also felt really important to me, that the environment of the other musicians that I play with are also in that real, do whatever you want. And if it comes out great, fantastic. And if it comes out like a duck, great, fantastic.
I'm identifying like 3 kind of pieces of the recipe. One was starting somewhere that was medium hard, not hard, maybe even easy, like low complexity. 2 is playing with something that you like, that you actually already know and like. And 3rd is a supportive environment, having that big brother type of person there to say, it's all good, and it's one of the things that I teach my flutarians is that when we listen to our recordings, there should be at least these 2 personality types listening. One is our best flute teacher, who can give us very specific advice. And the other is our biggest fan. For me, I think of Grandma Wheeler, who she didn't care what I play. I'm a much better flutist than she is, no matter if I'm just playing one note or not. So she was always there to congratulate me. And those 2 are like the foils to the inner critic. My inner critic has a name. Her name is Becky. And sometimes I have to say, Becky, not now. But I always try to thank her, because she's there to serve a purpose. Our inner critic is there to prevent me, at least, from embarrassing myself. She tries to tell me what's going to embarrass myself before anyone else can. But sometimes, but that should not be the loudest voice if we want to improve, or if we want to just feel good and healthy.
Right. And it has a different tone to it as well. So one of the things that, particularly when I'm talking about performance blocks, more than just, so I've got these 2 kind of ways that I work. One is the focal dystonia, which is very specific about the body movement disorder, but then also around performance blocks in general, which is my free to perform, which I don't have on a course at the moment. I only have that in a book, but that will be coming online probably later on this year. And so one of the things that I taught within that performance blocks is that we all have these 5 really important gifts that make us performers, right? One of them is our ability to be attuned and empathetic with ourselves and with others. Another is our ability to be disciplined and constant. I practice. We have to practice. We need to put the hours in with this. The other one is resilience, and not that kind of tough it out resilience, but just the resilience that, I made a mistake and I can get back on the horse, right? And, just being able to sort of not collapse, because things don't always go to plan the way we think they're going to. But the fact that we can just keep going and bounce back is really important. And then we need to have also this kind of sense, I call it the visionary, this sense of the art that's within me, the sense of the music I want to play, the sense of the joy that this creates. And then the last one is our aesthetic sensitivity. So, if I can't hear if the quality of my note, then that quality is never going to improve, right?
Listening.
But what happens is, because of this adapted relationship to self, which we've only done because we've had to survive in the environments that we've been in, right? Those have been really, when I look at all the kind of these early adaptations that I had as a person, I also absolutely love those parts of me because they kept me safe in a very difficult and early environment in my life. And they really kept me safe, right? So, thank them every day. But they got to a point where that strategy was, the price I was paying for those strategies was too high from the benefit it was giving me. And so what happens is, as we shift back to more of our, real self, whilst we're in those adaptations, those 5 gifts get turned into adaptations, right? So, for instance, that ability to be attuned and empathetic, we start turning into people pleasing, avoiding conflict, worrying about what other people think about me. Our discipline can get turned into this really harsh sort of discipline. You've got to do it, no pain, no gain type, which makes us rigid. Or we start to get into hurry. I get this sense of my joy and what I like to play, but then, the uncertainty of whether I'll actually ever be able to do that or not makes me accelerate, hurry up, skip over proper practice because I want to be the fastest flute player in the world already, right? And then, I mean, not to bore you too much with all the details, but where I wanted to get to is that sensitivity to quality then turns into the perfectionism, where it's like, that sounds rubbish, it's no good, I can't do this, and yet, so you've got that. So what you're talking about is that combination of those 2 pieces of sensitivity. One is, oh gosh, people are going to think I've made a fool of myself. People are going to be judging me. So that first one. So I become rigid. And then that starts going, well, you've got to get it absolutely right because otherwise it's all going to be awful, and starts then being this sort of really negative inner voice. And what we want to do is be able to turn that into a voice that goes, oh yeah, can you hear that? Now that's not what I had in my mind. In my mind, I was imagining that note was like, that sort of upward scale was like mountain goats skipping over the rocks. And actually what it sounded like was, right? It wouldn't be that bad. But, it's like sometimes we do that kind of heavy tonguing because we're not using enough support. And we, instead of getting a bum-ba-dee-dum-bum, we sort of get a da-da-dee-da-dum. Well, I can hear the difference, but I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I'm just going to go, who can tell me what's going on there? And who can help me learn about what I can be doing different with my body to get that boom, 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 boom,
ease. I want my flute playing to almost always sound easy, effortless.
Mm.
You're reminding
Mm.
me of the importance of listening to our recordings, because sometimes
Yeah.
my inner critic is just like, "Oh, that sucked." But I go back and I listen to the recording, and sometimes there's even these little happy little accidents or divine accidents where I thought it was a mistake, and I listened to it, and in the context of an audience listening to it like an audience, I'm like, "Oh, that was actually interesting," or "It sounded
Yeah.
nice. It sounded good." So I think there's two
Yeah.
types of mistakes. There's mistakes that our thought process is going, "Oh, I didn't mean to do that." And there's mistakes that the audience hears as a mistake, and they're not always the same.
No. Well, have you heard the Herbie Hancock story?
What story are you thinking of?
So Herbie Hancock was playing with Miles Davis, and he was really young at that point. It was like the big gig, wow, I'm playing with Miles Davis. Right? And Miles is in the middle of his solo, and Herbie Hancock makes a mistake with the chord on the piano. And he's like, my worst nightmare has become a reality. Yeah. Miles Davis goes off and does this something absolutely extraordinary with it. And then, at the end of the gig, or when they get the chance to speak, Miles goes to him, "Wow, where did that inspiration come?" That note, to hit that note at that point was just phenomenal. It opened up this whole creative space for me. So as you
Divine
say,
accident.
sometimes divine accidents, and they're
Yeah.
the best thing that could ever happen.
I think this would be a good time to invite questions. If Nancy or Bianca, you
Mm,
have any questions,
mm.
feel free to come off mute or type them in the chat. Ruth, would you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now with the Focal Dystonia Method online?
Okay, so I'd written this book, that book, a few years ago, which talks about the method, because I realised I'd reached a point where I can't take any more people to, my diary's full. I have been training other therapists as well to be able to work with people with the method. And so I wrote this book just to give people a little bit of guidance so that they could start working with some ideas on their own. And I realized there was such a big gap between the book and between actually what it would be like to be able to really explain people through the therapy, hold people through the therapy. And I just really was going over and over in my mind, how can I fill that gap? Because therapy, one-to-one therapy, is also expensive. Not everybody can afford that. Not everybody has the time for that. And I was like, well, how can I fill that gap? And so what I started to do was just record everything that I do with people. So I've created in total, there's 52 modules, and each module has about 7 videos in it. So we're talking about 360 a year's worth of content in 3, 4, 5-minute videos. Some of them are a little bit longer, which just really drip feeds the information around what's going on. So I give people a whole tour of their nervous system, what's happening in your nervous system. What's happening in your nervous system around movement, around memory, emotions, the relationship between emotion and movement, the relationship between emotion and the body, the fascia in the body, which holds the body to be either rigid or flexible. And then and then there's all these exercises. So I take them through each of the different exercises that they can be working with on their own to help release the dystonia. And there are demonstrations of that. And then I have in each module at least 1 or 2 clients talking about what they learned along the way. So for instance, things like one of the early exercises is actually quite simple, but people think that it should be harder than that. So people try really hard, and the harder they try, the harder it becomes. So I have one of my clients talking about, well, actually the breakthrough for me was realizing that this is really simple. It's just, follow 1, 2, 3, and that's it. You don't have to do any more than that. So And I've put that all onto an online program so people can subscribe to that. It's either they can subscribe monthly or they can sign up for the whole year. And just each day they get a new video. And each week they have an exercise to do or a couple of exercises. And then they have journal pages that they can download so they can journal as they go along. And then we have a monthly call. So they also have another kind of part of their journal is questions for Ruth. So anything that comes up that they're not sure about or they have a doubt about, they just jot that down and then bring that to the monthly call where I can do some kind of online coaching with people in that call and guidance.
I just recently listened to Victor Wooten's book, The Music Lesson. And one of the things that his music teacher says in that book is, don't try harder, try easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were saying some of the things in your program, they think, oh, I need to practice harder. I need to do it harder. But sometimes the key is this other phrase I like to use, you can't force flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any questions in the audience? Looks like a no.
Nancy?
Anything else bubbling up for you, Ruth, that you want to share?
Well, I was interested. I mean, I don't want to put either Bianca or Nancy on the spot, but I was kind of interested to know what it's like for you to hear this. Is this information new to you? How does it sit with you? Does it resonate? Is it things that you've heard before?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with it at all, and I guess my question is, when you're working with someone, how much of it is like a physical thing, and how much of it is just in the mind? I don't know.
That is a really good question. And I think that's where the more recent advances in the neuroscience have really helped us understand that actually, if I get this right, around 85% of the information that our brain is processing is coming from the body up to the brain. And only about 15% is going in the other direction. So where kind of, the world of therapy comes out of Freud and Jung and, these early 19th century therapists, where it's like this thought, well, or even beyond that, I mean, it even comes right back to Descartes, where he says, I think, therefore I am. And what we've actually realized in the more recent information that's coming through from our neuroscientific studies is I am, therefore I think. So it's actually almost impossible to divide the mind and the body, which is one of the mistakes that happened very early on in psychology. So, I mean, we can try this. I'll give you a kind of, so one of the techniques that I use within the method is something that's called brain spotting, this was developed by an American psychologist called David Grand, he's brilliant. He's sort of one of my teachers within that sort of technical side. But we can try this because you'll get the sense of what that's like, of what happens with this. So, for instance, if you were just right now to feel into an area of your body that's really easy to connect to and where there's lots of well-being. For instance, my hands feel warm and well and I can connect to them really easily. Everyone has a unique place, yeah? You got that? So if you were to close your eyes and then feel into that and just stay connected to the physical sensation, after a while you realize that your eyes are actually a particular angle, even though your eyelids are closed. And then you could just open your eyes. My eyes go down there when I'm feeling into my hands. And you can open your eyes and just let them stay at that angle. And you might want to close and open them a few times to get it right, just to kind of really hone it in. And then you realize, that actually helps me feel into my hands when I'm looking there, in my case. But it looks like you've really got that, yeah? Could you connect to that?
Trying to, yeah. It's interesting.
Could you get the sense of that, Nancy?
Yeah, I'm kind of connecting with my feet.
Okay. I mean, it does take a bit of practice, but we do realize that. So there's this phrase when the brain spot is where we look affects the way we feel. So we realize that actually the brain, in order to connect into the body, uses eye positions. Also to connect into memories as well and into emotions. So what that means is that if I want to be, I mean, just in a really simple, easy tool. I mean, I kind of I've developed this even more in terms of being able to really connect into flow and ease. But just as a real kind of simple tool, if I know where there's ease in my body and I can feel into that and I can let my eyes go to wherever they go in order to connect to that, the rest of me starts to relax as well. That's a really nice preparation before I pick this up. Or if I pick this up and I notice myself going, right, I could just go, where feels really easy, it's there. Let my eyes go to wherever they naturally want to go to. And then this just starts to let go. So that's the sort of way that I work. So I'm working very much with the body. I have clients that don't speak to me through the whole of the session. I work with them because they've connected inwards into something, and they're just like their brain is processing, and it's literally rewiring itself. And I'm just present with them. I'm there if they need me. I have other clients that talk loads. Right? Well, this is happening, that's happening. Wow, I'm feeling. So it depends on the person, but. There's that just real, the connection into the body and the brain will follow and it rewires depending on what we're connecting to through the body. Does that answer your question, Nancy?
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I'm constantly fascinated by this world. And I think there's more and more and more for us to learn and that we will be learning over the next decade or so. Other reflections?
How about you, Bianca? Anything bubbling up?
Well, I wish I'd had seen this when I was in music school because that was very stressful, and I definitely had the feeling if I was on stage, if I made a mistake, I would die. And then at my senior recital, everything went really well, except this one high note. Just I lost it. It just wasn't there. But it didn't really bother me that much. And one of our friends in the audience said, "I really, really enjoyed their set, except for that one note." And it was like a
Gee,
joke.
thanks.
But
Yeah.
it's not like someone's gonna die.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, part of my vision going forward, certainly with the free to perform, is, I would, of course, to create the program for performers to go through so they can do their own work around freeing up whatever's blocked, but also for teachers. I think as teachers, it's really important to understand the impact. I mean, I think through my classical training, I'm not going to talk about now because the teacher I have now is just fabulous. But in my classical training, that sort of from age 10 up to 18, I had 6 months where I had a good teacher. The rest, it was all, that's wrong, this is wrong, shouldn't sound like that, blah, 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 blah. Nobody actually told me what to do, how to make it sound great. And it was similar teaching. My musical education was like that. Let's play the piece through, and then we'd only talk about the bit that didn't sound very good. Nobody spent an hour going, that sounds great because you're doing this, and that sounds great because you're doing that. I love the way that sounded.
Well, the mind doesn't hear the don't or the not, the negative things like say, don't do that. doesn't really do any good, but you just need to say what to do and how to make it
Right.
better. They don't need a critique. That's what I find. I try not to give a
Yeah.
critique. I just try to tell
Yeah.
them, make it better,
Yeah. Yeah.
or what they could
Absolutely.
do differently, basically.
Absolutely. And how important the relationship is. You talked about that, Vic, as well. When you said, part of what you're doing is teaching, part of what you're doing is like as a counsellor. But actually, the relationship that you're creating as a teacher for people is probably more important than the technical information that we're giving our students. If a student feels safe and joyful with you, they will improve anyway, just because of the time that they're spending on the instrument or just by listening to what you're playing. And we're natural imitators, right? And if you don't get that safe bit right, no matter how much technical wisdom you might have to share, that person's body's already like this. And so they can't put that into place.
Kindness first is the phrase that's coming to mind.
Yeah.
And also, sometimes I think when I talk to these various classically trained flutists, there must be some really mean flute teachers out there. I'm glad I didn't meet most of them or study under most of them, but there's some undoing to be done for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Re-embracing the playing for the joy
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. And as children, we don't get the choice about who we have as a flute teacher, right?
Sure.
I mean, nowadays, lovely Emma Shubin dropped a note on your post the other day. Emma was my first teacher that when I came back to playing the flute a few years back. And, she's wonderful and joyful and so as an adult I can choose that. I'd see her online and see how fantastic she was, like, oh, I'd like to take classes with her, right? And I'd see other teachers like, I'm not going to take classes with them. And I think it was one of the things that really called my attention to you, Vic, when I started to see your posts on Facebook. It was like, wow, this guy's great. That just the how you are as a person, but then also the way you were talking about what happens in your classes and what it is to learn. It's, so as adults we can choose, and often as children we can't, or as young people we can't.
Yeah. Well, I think that music is so much more than a profession. It's in us, it's deep in our bones, and that it connects us to our communities. And I want to empower people to, no matter what their education level, be able to connect with their friends and family and community through music.
Right. And that's what music has been. That's the real story of music. And where I live here, music is still very much part of everyday life. And we'll have a barbecue and, someone will turn up with a guitar and now someone else will turn up, and then all of a sudden people are singing. And I mean, the caja that they have here with the flamenco box, right? And all of a sudden people are there's somebody playing percussion, there's someone singing, there's somebody playing a guitar, and it's just not just as if the same as if we're sitting around having a chat.
Yep.
And that's the origins of music, right?
Musical conversation. Yep. Well, I want to point out that your website is called FocalDystoniaMethod.com. I'll post that link in all the replays. Mine, if you look up Flutarians, you can find me. I'm mostly on School, SKOOL. Would you be open to having a short musical conversation with me now?
Yeah, let's do something.
So I'm going to activate in School the setting for high audio so that it doesn't think my flute sounds are echoes.
Okay, but, so how do I do that down in settings, did you say to me?
Yep. I think it's simpler than Zoom's original sound for musicians, but they just launched it a couple months ago. I'm relatively pleased with it.
Okay. think that we are on. I think I'm on that.
I think so. I'm just going to turn my volume up a little bit in my headphones. So,
Can you hear me okay?
yeah, I can hear you
Sound
just
like
fine.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear me good?
Yeah.
So I think I'll give you the easy part to start with, and then we'll swap. So I have these two improv scaffoldings that I use frequently in improv games, and I call them scaffoldings because it's like the scaffoldings next to an incomplete building. It's like an incomplete composition, and just gives us a place to start. So we'll play around in the key of A minor, and you can start with just this rhythmic part, 4 A's and 4 G's, and just repeat on that, and I'll take your rhythm and I'll flow with it, and then at some point I'll switch over to playing that part, and when you hear me playing the A, G, 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 you can take a little time to improvise on top, and then when you give me a little gentle flute down, we can end it. Make sense?
Sure. Yeah. So we're working with G natural.
Yeah. The key of A minor, so it's all natural notes. And how about you start by playing 4 A's and 4 G's and keep that on repeat, and I'll come in once I've caught your groove, so to speak.
Okay. First notes of the day.
Yeah, the first couple for me.
I'm going to play down there. I might change octave in a while,
Sure.
but let's see how we go. Hey, thank you.
Well, thanks for playing around a little bit with me. Your warm-up for the day.
My warm-up for the day.
One of the things I like to encourage flute players to dip their toe in is just make improvisation part of your warm-up or your cool-down. Even just starting with 1 or 5 minutes is a lot more progress than doing it not at all, 0. So.
Yeah, great advice.
Great. Well, thanks for playing a little bit of music with me. Thanks for taking this time to share with us your story and how you're helping people helping people recover and overcome their performance blocks. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Vic. Appreciate you too. Bianca, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Lovely to meet you. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you all later. Right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.